Penn State went out and added Trevor Pena, Devontae Ross, and Kyron Hudson. They overhauled the wide receiver room, and apparently that's still not enough.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Zach Seyko, and I am your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. He is Dalton Wasserman, expert when it comes to college football over at Pro Football Focused, host of PFF's college football show. Dalton, thank you so much for the time. We had a back and forth about, hey, which Penn State player, if you could have a former player return for this Nittany Lion team. You said Tyler Warren. Well, with what they have at tight end and wide receiver, we're going to get to all of that, plus what to expect from Drew Allar, what the analytics say about him going into his senior season, and if Penn State fans should be excited or should they be concerned, and then the biggest threat outside of Penn State to a title run, so getting a better understanding of the landscape of how college football is going to look this season. Thank you to the everydayers. Of course, always let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. Dalton, let's discuss that, because you say Tyler Warren. I say Jaquan Brisker, so it kind of opens up a debate. Okay, maybe Penn State's weakest link is still wide receiver or pass catchers, or is it safety? Because I like Zach Wheatley a lot, but I do think another guy in the in the back end of the secondary would really help out with him. So what's your reasoning for Tyler Warren?
Yeah, I think you just look at the overhaul of the wide receiver room. Obviously, that's been a problem for the last 2 years. And now you look at their passing game being even less proven than it was last year. And I know Penn State's always got a loaded tight end room, but when you look at what Tyler Warren did last season, especially in the first year under offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki, and him being able to use them as the Swiss Army knife and really the center of the entire offense in the passing game and the run game, I think having a proven option like Warren doing what he did last year and maybe having a chance to repeat that this season, that would be such a big asset, right? And then open things up for what you're hoping is an improved wide receiver core, right? So I think the idea is obviously you want to be better on the outside. And I know there's a lot of faith in guys like Khalil Dinkins and Luke Reynolds, obviously, but they're both young players who are unproven as receivers. If you had Tyler Warren still in the mix, I think it would open everything else up in this offense, especially with year two and how much Andy Kotelnicki could have gotten creative with them. But obviously we don't blame him for coming out and being a first-round pick. But man, oh man, I just think the number of different dimensions that he added to the offense last year, once they figured out he was the premier playmaker, I think that would complement the rest of this receiving corps so well.
No, and I can't disagree with you whatsoever, because the kind of caliber of player that Tyler Warren was, it's just that, well, it's not about him being a tight end. It's just him being a superstar and almost unguardable to an extent within last year's offense that did struggle to create. I mean, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen aside, but in the passing game, the creativity was still very limited outside of what they did with Tyler Warren. So now you combine the idea of Tyler Warren with Trevor Pena, Devontae Ross, Kyron Hudson. Okay, Luke Reynolds and Khalil Dinkins would probably rotate in a little bit, but then, Tyler Warren's still going to eat up a bulk of the reps. So it's not really so much the conversation about Warren, but that you still say this passing game is unproven to a point that, and I know PFF had Penn State's wide receivers within the top 15. So they were getting some respect. There is the talent aspect of it. So what ultimately leads you to believe that, I agree that there's a chemistry issue, at least that's by proxy. It's not intentional, and that Penn State's not working on it. But when you bring in three outside playmakers and they all have to gel within a certain amount of time, that's difficult. Is there more to it for you than just that?
I think for me, we just need to see this offense, and the playoff loss to Notre Dame is the perfect example. We need to see this offense be able to beat really good man-to-man coverage, right? I know these guys can get open, and Andy Kotelnicki can scheme them open against, the lesser teams in the Big Ten and the teams they're supposed to beat. Well, when you get in those big-time matchups, right, when you get later in the year against Notre Dame, when you even Ohio State, it was a struggle for them to get open man-to-man, or a team like Georgia maybe in the playoffs, somebody like that who knows they can match up well man-to-man with these wide receivers on the outside. That's the biggest thing for me. There's no question that they can tear apart zone coverages when they're not being physically pressed at the line of scrimmage. scrimmage. Drew Allar is maybe the best quarterback in the country at throwing down the seams of a defense, down the hash marks, down the middle of the field. But on the outside, can they expand this passing game to the outer parts of the field? And can they beat teams who play really good man-to-man coverage? I don't think it's a huge problem on a week-to-week basis in the regular season, but I look at the big matchups, and in the regular season, especially the Ohio State matchup, that's where they had such problems last year scoring on Ohio State, was that they just couldn't separate from man-to-man coverage, and Tyler Warren was really the only guy at the tight end spot that could do that.
Trevor Pena, Devontae Ross, Kyron Hudson all come in with unique skill sets. And you asked myself, yourself, so we're going to get your opinion, of course, but anybody else, it seems like there's a different opinion. Oh, Kyron Hudson's going to be the leading wide receiver. Trevor Pena, they brought him in for a reason, with the alleged NIL that he was asking for. Well, I'm a big fan of Devontae Ross. I think with what Andy Kotelnicki can do with the ground game opens up a lot of big plays for Ross to where he's going to, by volume of air yardage, he's going to lead the receivers because he's going to be that big play threat. So Trevor Pena seems to be the obvious one coming over with the production that he had at Syracuse. Hey, Kyron Hudson was at USC, but that was just a crowded depth chart. And I like the big playability of Devontae Ross. So where do you stand as far as who is the most talented and should be the most leading wide receiver at the end of the day out of this group?
I think, to me, the most talented one, and I think you mentioned it because of the explosiveness there, it's probably Ross when it comes to this offense and working downfield in the way that I think his speed can play down the seams. And I like that you mentioned through those play-action schemes where that's where they attack. Once those linebackers and safeties step up, they really get down the hash marks. He's the guy that's looking to get vertical. But it also wouldn't shock me to see Pena lead the team because I think he'll probably lead the team in catches, right? He's the guy. I really think they were missing that last year. I know they had Trey Wallace and they had Amari Evans, but they were both really, to me, the same kind of receiver, right? Vertical threats, vertical outside threats at that. And I know they tried, Liam Clifford in the slot. Tyler Warren had to move around the formation. But to me, they didn't have a guy like Trevor Pena. So I could see a scenario where Pena maybe even leads them in catches and then Ross leads them in yards because he's making the explosive plays. I think what Kotelnicki wants to do, and obviously it was very centered around Tyler Warren last year, but he wants to spread the ball around. And he's always, even when he was at Kansas, he's had wide receiver rooms that punched above their weight class, so to speak. I think that's going to be the case with this entire room, but I could see Pena leading them in catches, Ross leading them in yards, depending on how many explosive plays they can open up for him. But it's going to be very much, instead of being centered on Warren and then everything bouncing off of him, I think it's going to be much more evenly distributed.
Let's wrap up this first segment with this, because I mentioned safety. Jaquan Brisker, I think, would have been a very helpful re-addition to this Penn State team going into 2025. Zach Wheatley, I think, is definitely all conference. As some people are saying All-American. Okay, that's lofty praise, but he was one of those players that he was on the all postseason team from last season. I mean, Wheatley is on the cusp of turning into that true star player. But there are questions outside of A.J. Harris and Wheatley as far as who's going to start. Okay, Elliott Washington, Davian Collins, King Mack, Dejon Lane. There's about three. Zion Tracy. There's 3 spots in the secondary that Penn State had up for grabs when it comes to the starters. So, Dalton, where do you stand that, again, you're still going to take Tyler Warren. Do you give a second thought to what the secondary has to offer? Maybe you're somebody that thinks that defensive tackle is still a big concern.
I think even edge defender, to be honest with you. You just lost Abdul Carter, right? And there's obviously plenty of great edge defenders when you talk about the history of Penn State, right? Or even you think about a Micah Parsons, right? And maybe you move him to the edge full time for another season here and you get somebody going off the edge. Maybe it's just Abdul Carter from last year. I think there are certain spots. You look at Penn State's defense. I don't know that they're as deep this year. I still think there's star level talent, right? Zane Durant as your big defensive tackle, I should say twitchy 3-technique defensive tackle. Deny Dennis Sutton. I have linebackers who can really cover, but maybe I could use another run stopper inside there. So I think that's going to be a big thing with this defense. It's still going to be very good, and I'm fascinated to see what Jim Knowles is going to do and how he's going to optimize that, because even with all the talent at Ohio State last year, he had to make adjustments late in the year to really get that defense playing in an ideal manner. So I think any of those options would be good ones to make them better. If it's Brisker, it's safety. If it's another primetime corner, if it's somebody like Carter or Parsons off the edge, I think all of them would help them immensely, because I just don't see, for the moment, as much depth as we've seen in past years. The star talent is definitely still there. The starting lineup is still an elite level in college football, but I'm wondering which of the younger guys kind of steps up, especially for me. I'm looking at that defensive line. Aside from Dennis Sutton and Durant, who can be one more just great pass rusher for this team?
Well, I will let you know that there is optimism over on this side of things that Zuriah Fisher is going to have that breakout if he can stay healthy. The only questions about him for Penn State is, can he go through a full season with the injuries that he's dealt with in the past, not once, but twice. So that's a breakout candidate to circle if you're unsure outside of Dennis Sutton and Durant. So we mentioned pass catchers and what they're going to bring, and that there should be optimism. Drew Allar, is he going to take that step forward, a bigger step forward? Year 2 of Andy Kotelnicki. He's lost 10 pounds, so he's more of a dual threat. We're going to get the analytical side of what to expect from Allar this upcoming season coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Time to fuel up and turn it up with a 5 Hour Energy transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Let's be honest, some days on the course or off of it, you just need the extra boost to stay sharp and energized. Golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors, of course. The grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without chasing down the bev cart. If you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5 Hour Energy shots today. Drew Allar's coming in with some people saying that he's a Heisman contender. I don't know that I necessarily, and it's not because of a talent issue. It has to do more so with stats. You're sharing an offense with Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen to where there's going to be everybody needs to get the football. It's not just condensed to 1 or 2 players. And we talked about that with the pass catchers. Having 3 legitimate options if they all stay healthy, and then 2, maybe 3 up-and-coming tight ends. And then you got to give Singleton and Kaytron Allen the football out of the backfield. Drew Allar has a lot of weapons at his disposal, is my point. So for him to either be the same, slightly above average, I do think he can be a player that continues to lead Penn State to victories that are, he's not going to take a step backwards. And I don't think he's going to stay in the same spot. I think he's going to take a big step forward, but not to a point where, he's going to be a Heisman finalist at the end of the day. But I think he will continue to show that he has elements and tools to be a potential number 1 overall pick, at least in the top 10 of next year's NFL draft.
I completely agree, and there's still another step to take. And I think with Allar, we're going to talk about him this year in the sense of big moments, right? I think you know what you're getting out of him across the whole season. And I think one thing that's underrated is that, even considering the big arm, and he's a big pocket quarterback that wants to throw it downfield, especially he got more vertical last year, is that he doesn't turn the football over very much. He doesn't put the ball in danger very much, right? A 1.5% turnover-worthy play rate for us in his career. That's one of the best that we've ever tracked for a Power 5 quarterback, in the 11 years that we've been doing this. So he's got a great arm. He's got to work on the footwork and the ball placement a little bit. He's still not elite when it comes to ball placement, especially when you get to the outer parts of the field. A lot of times it gets underrated when you're throwing to the outside and you really have to turn and rotate your body to make those outside throws. I think it's something Allar needs to work on. Down the middle of the field, he's one of the 4 or 5 best passers in the country. Down the seams, no player in the country completed more seam balls than Drew Allar last season. So I think there's certain throws that he's used to, he's excellent with. He's just got to make more throws on the outside, and the ball placement's got to be better, and the receivers have to be better outside the numbers too, right? So I think you mentioned it. You added a little bit of the running dimension last year with Kotelnicki involving him a little bit more. You might even see that a little bit more this year as long as he's safe about it and not taking too many hits. Because, we talked about the loss of Tyler Warren and the turnover receiver a lot, but losing Bo Pribula and losing Tyler Warren both as Wildcat options too takes just another small dimension out of the offense, right? So maybe Allar has to be a little more responsible on the ground as well. But you know what you're getting out of him. But we're going to judge Drew Allar. Most people are going to judge Drew Allar this year by the Oregon game, by the Ohio State game, the Big Ten title game, the playoff games, assuming that they get there, right? And those moments where he just has to keep his cool and place the ball where it needs to be in those big moments. That's really what most people's gripe is with Drew Allar. On a week-to-week basis, he's easily a top 10 and probably a top 5 quarterback in college football. It's just those moments where he has to make those big throws in big moments. That's where we're going to judge him at the end of the day.
And he's going to bear a lot of responsibility for that, because you could say, he's not absolved of the mistakes that were made in those high caliber games. But when you do you pinpoint to a couple of plays, okay, that interception against Notre Dame, Mari Evans could have run a better route at the time. Trey Wallace in the end zone against Ohio State, the ball was placed perfectly, and I imagine it. Maybe not necessarily perfectly, but it was placed right there for Wallace, and it went out of his hands and into the cornerback Igbinason over at Ohio State. So those are the kinds of things that Allar's going to get blamed for in the stats that are going to show up only when you watch the game footage back, or you look at the analytics, you look at PFF, and you say, okay, hey, this player didn't have the best grade at the end of the day. I like what Allar can do as an athlete. I think people maybe say that he's too much of a statue. Not everybody, but some people are going to say, well, he's just a pocket passer. He has no mobility, and that's just not true. And I think losing that extra weight will give Allar another element that people are just going to have to account for on defense. But nobody's pointed it out to this point, outside of us here on the show, is that Bo Pribula and Tyler Warren, you do lose that Wildcat package. So it means that, okay, when you have a quarterback depth chart where I like Jackson Smolik, I like Ethan Grunkemeyer, but are you going to put Allar more in harm's way by having him run the football more when he really is one of the players that you can't afford to lose to injury whatsoever?
Absolutely. I think, look, you mentioned it first on his mobility. Look, nobody's going to mistake him for Jaden Daniels or Lamar Jackson, right? That's not going to be the case. But what he does have is functional mobility, right? When you think about even the certain guys in the NFL, I think about Joe Burrow, right? He's not an A-plus athlete, but he's got functional mobility, and he can pick up first downs when he needs to. My guess is that Andy Kotelnicki would respond to the personnel losses by probably using Allen and Singleton more in wildcat roles also, especially when you talk about down on the goal line and, teaching them the read option and reading one guy with a handful of practice reps over the summer. They can do that at least at a decent level, at least at the same level that Tyler Warren did it. I don't know if they could throw like Tyler Warren, but I think that's going to be the response. Is you have these two backs, you're going to lean on them. They both came back for a reason, to put it all on the line and win a national title. Now, again, Allar, I think he can make plays outside of the pocket. I'm curious to see more so where the bootleg game goes off the zone running game for Kotelnicki. I think that's the fun part, is that what Andy Kotelnicki has shown us both at Kansas and now in 1 year at Penn State is that he will put anything in schematically that fits any of his players' skill set. If that means putting a tight end at center to catch a touchdown, cool. If that means using your backup quarterback as a wildcat, cool. The screen game, offensive lineman lining up in the slot, extra offensive lineman, 9,000 tight ends on the field. He has proven that he can schematically adjust to anything. It's why he can more, maybe as much as any offensive coordinator in the country, he creates first downs and he creates points, right? And I think with as much talent as Penn State still has on offense, that's such a huge advantage. So he's really the equalizer there. And I think as far as Allar goes, I'm not worried about a lack of mobility. It's not A-plus for sure, but it's not meant to be either. And naturally, he's a pocket passer, but he certainly has functional mobility that can add to the offense.
Where do you think Allar will ultimately end up, when the top quarterback rankings are finalized, or the grades are finalized right over the course of the season? Cade Klubnik is a name that, Locked On has him as the top quarterback going into this season. There's Lenore Sellers, right? I can rattle off a bunch of different quarterbacks. But I do think Allar is in the mix to be considered this tier 1 QB where, there's an argument for him to be number 1. There's an argument for him to be number 5. Some people are going to put him outside the top 10, so be it. I do see him finishing as a top 5 graded QB. Arch Manning, Cade Klubnik, Allar finishing 3 there, or it's any combination of those 3. I think those are the 3. Maybe it's because I'm looking at them from an NFL draft profile as well. But I think that's how those quarterbacks will look when you're grading them off of everything rather than just, okay, how many yards did he put up? How many stats did he put up? That kind of thing, where it's the Heisman maybe isn't necessarily about how did they impact the game, but maybe a little bit of stat padding as well.
Yeah, look, and I think that's the reason I wouldn't pick Allar to win the Heisman is because he's just not going to get the volume like some of those other guys are going to get. And Penn State, ideally, they want to be about 50-50 when it comes to run pass, right? And they ask Allar to go off play after. If that, I mean, there's games we saw in the second half last year where they really have no reason to throw the football, right? So I think Cade Klubnik's going to throw the lights out of the football. Garrett Nussmeyer's, he was second in the country in dropbacks last year. If Drew Allar's second in the country at dropbacks at Penn State, there's a serious problem, right? So it's that thing where it's like they don't want Drew Allar to throw for 5,000 yards, or they probably have a lot of other issues on their team, right? So that's a reason I wouldn't pick him to win a Heisman. But if you're talking about next year's draft and things like that, this quarterback class to me, for as much as everybody wants to make all these proclamations right now a year ahead of time, it's a very wait-and-see quarterback class. A couple of years ago when we had Caleb Williams going in, we knew he'd be a star. We knew Drake May was a star. We knew Michael Penix and J.J. McCarthy were really good, right? I think this year we have a bunch of guys who right now have probably late first or second round grades, Allar included, and we want to see who takes that next step because they all have their flaws. Allar's got to work on ball placement. Nussmeier's a gunslinger. I'm looking at Sam Levitt from Arizona State too. I think he's really talented. He's a little bit raw. Sellers, you mentioned, is a great athlete, but he's raw, especially on underneath throws. There's so many guys who could be a top 5 pick in next year's draft, Allar included, who have to patch up 1 or 2 more flaws before they're an elite prospect, right? Because that's what you're really looking for. You look, this year's draft proved it. Cam Ward came out. He was the one elite prospect that the league felt really good about, and nobody else went until, 25th in Jackson Dart, and even that was debatable among a lot of circles whether he should have been a first-round pick. I just think Allar and probably 6 or 7 other guys, we just have to, including Arch Manning, we just need to wait and see how the season plays out. I'm a huge Manning optimist, but I'll even admit he's made 2 starts. There's not a huge sample. Let's see it against the full SEC schedule, right? So Allar, I absolutely think can and probably will be among those top 5 guys, especially with as high as his floor is and his ball security, but there's still things to work on.
Well, we've mentioned the variety of quarterbacks that people should be excited about, but let's take that a step further. All of those teams that Penn State could face in a potential postseason, Ohio State, Oregon, those are the big games on the schedule, right? And Penn State has an issue with the big game. So who is the biggest threat to a potential title run for Penn State? We're going to discuss that coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Dalton, when I think about the biggest threats to Penn State's title run outside of the Big Ten, of course, Ohio State's always going to be there. I think Penn State catches Oregon at a favorable spot, but down the road, I could see Oregon peaking in the second half of the season just because they're breaking in new quarterback, new O-line, new running back, new wide receivers, basically a new offense aside from the coordinator. So that's a team that second half of the season, you probably don't want to play them. I digress from that. Outside of the Big Ten, Texas, Arch Manning. At Georgia, right? They made some additions through the transfer portal. I don't know that I'm sold on Gunnar Stockton. And then there's Clemson. We don't talk about all the great things that Penn State has, returning a veteran quarterback, 2 veteran playmakers in the backfield, or at least when it comes to returning overall production. I mean, Penn State's not even the best one. It's Clemson. Clemson returns the most production from last season. Dabo Swinney, go figure, they add Tom Allen, just kind of similarly how Penn State adds Jim Knowles. So there's a lot of parallels, and I could see a Penn State versus Clemson title game. I'm not guaranteeing it, but I start to lean that way because of what they have returning: veteran quarterback, consistency, continuity, and just talent across the board in terms of stars.
Absolutely. When you look at that Clemson team, and one of the themes of this summer has just been looking at the roster and seeing how much young talent came back from last year's team. According to our wins above average metric here at PFF, Clemson returned 16 of the 20 most valuable players. I mean, you talk about very, very few losses. Basically, the running back room is a question, but other than that, the entire team is back from last year, and they have 3 of the top 10 players in our PFF top 50 in Cade Klubnik, and then defensive lineman Peter Woods and TJ Parker. Their defense is spectacular. Their passing game is spectacular. They need to figure out who's playing running back. It seems like it's going to be true freshman Gideon Davidson, but Clemson is absolutely as loaded as any team in the country. And when you think about the ACC, and there are some good teams in the ACC, Miami, Louisville, Duke, Georgia Tech, SMU, right? There's some good teams, but I think the one clearest preseason projection for me right now is Clemson winning the ACC, because they really weren't supposed to win it last year with all the youth that they had and the questions about Klubnik. Now they're the clearest favorite in any conference in the country to win their conference, and I think you could argue the best chance this season to go undefeated through the regular season.
Am I missing anybody? I didn't immediately mention Alabama because they have questions at quarterback. Again, Georgia, collectively a really good team, but I'm not sold on Gunnar Stockton. I'm really not. So that's why I say, hey, Texas, they're going to have an elite defense. That's a defensive title caliber defense. And then Arch Manning really doesn't have to do much, right? Just be competent, be capable. And then you have, right, the weapons that they're going to, and the coaching and everything else. So Ohio State, Penn State, Clemson, I think those are the teams that I will say, yeah, are real. Texas are really that first 4, that tier 1 of true title contenders, with Georgia and Alabama if they can get quarterback under wraps.
I'm one who's in it. I'm going to mention one that you mentioned right there. I'm one who's very optimistic on Alabama. They brought a boatload of talent back. Like pretty much their entire defense outside of Jahad Campbell is back. I think their defense is in the running along with Clemson and Penn State. It's in the running to be the best in the country this year. I think last year, obviously, you were turning over from Nick Saban. They had a couple of games you probably don't think they should have won, but I'm a believer. It looks like Ty Simpson is going to be their starting quarterback. And look, he's got a lot of talent. He was a former 5-star recruit. I think he fits Kalen DeBoer's system well. And Ryan Grubb is back with DeBoer as their offensive coordinator. Those two were the ones that worked with Michael Penix at Washington. And what he's going to want Simpson to do, he's not the athlete Jalen Milroe is, but he's going to throw the ball on time. And I think that's something that's getting underrated here, is that Jalen Milroe, for as great an athlete as he wasn't really Kalen DeBoer's type of quarterback, the type of pocket quarterback, the type of timing quarterback that he usually likes. Simpson is that guy. I want to see it. I won't put Alabama right there in that inner circle with those other 4 teams you mentioned, but I think they're right behind it. And if we see Simpson in his first 3 or 4 games look the way that he's supposed to look under DeBoer and Grubb, then I'm in, because they have a boatload of talent. They have a big-time offensive line. They've got Ryan Williams, one of the best receivers in the country. I think Alabama really is the sleeper here. I know everyone's down on DeBoer. They lost 4 games last year, but first year in, let it ride. Their defense is spectacular. That's the biggest foundational piece for me. Alabama should be at least playoff or bust, and I think is the dark horse national title contender.
And that goes along with my theory of, okay, well, Dante, the same thing that I said about Dante Moore in Oregon, you can absolutely apply to Alabama, is that they are a young team filled with high-end potential, and they're only going to get better as they continue to gel and progress. So Penn State right out of the gate is going to be very good, but it's those teams that, do they gain ground? Do they catch up as the season progresses? Penn State, Clemson anyway, Texas, Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon. I still feel like they have the potential, and if they click, it's just going to make for an all very interesting postseason. So that is going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Dalton Wasserman of Pro Football Focus. Links to his work will be down in the description. He is a college football expert, and we'll be talking about the same things over on PFF that we do about Penn State specifically, but you get a larger respect to it over with what he does. Thank you so much for the time, Dalton. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for checking out this episode. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. And if you're not an everydayer, become one, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Again, Dalton, thank you again for the time, and hopefully we get to catch up again in the not too distant future.
Appreciate you having me on, Zach, as always. Thank you.